Can a braking system bring a driver like Lewis Hamilton to the brink of retirement and put an entire team like Ferrari in check? What engineers found inside car number 44 is not only terrifying, it could be the end of their chaotic year's second-place Constructors' Championship aspirations if they don't correct it in time. Will be too late. It all started with a subtle detail, almost imperceptible to the average spectator, but alarming to those who know the codes of Formula One. A change in Lewis Hamilton's attitude during the final laps of the Singapore Grand Prix. What seemed like simple race management, something common in the hybrid era, hit a mechanical emergency that could barely be controlled from the cockpit. A pilot accustomed to mastering the most complex situations, this time he was on the verge of abandoning, not due to human error, but due to a machine that was no longer responding to each braking. At the key moment of the race, when every thousandth counts and concentration reaches an almost instinctive state, Hamilton began to reduce his pace dramatically. International television showed how his times were falling, but what was not seen on screen were the coded radio messages between him and his engineer Riccardo Adami. There was recorded the phrase that chilled the blood of the Ferrari wall: "I have lost my brakes, partner." The left front brake does not respond. It wasn't an assumption. It was a diagnosis at full speed. As the car slid through the curves of the Marina Bay with erratic behavior, sparks flew under the car. Literally. The braking system was collapsing, and Hamilton was forced to control an SF-25 that no longer wanted to brake symmetrically. With each deceleration, the car became completely unbalanced. But the most terrifying thing was not the loss of the brake. That's what Ferrari discovered later. When disassembling the system after the race, engineers found clear signs of structural fatigue. The thermal buildup in the brake-by-wire had exceeded all safe limits. The MGU-K, a vital component of the hybrid system that recovers energy during braking, also showed signs of having operated well above its thermal threshold. And the worst thing is that this was not the first time. By analyzing historical telemetry, Ferrari confirmed that Hamilton's car had been running at the limit for several previous races. It was not an isolated incident. It was the consequence of a systematic pattern that, up to that point, had been camouflaged by piloting techniques such as lift and coast. This technique, common in energy management, now became a survival tool. Every time Hamilton released the accelerator before the ideal braking point, he did so not to save fuel or regenerate more energy. He did this to prevent the thermal system from completely collapsing. That caution, repeated lap after lap, was the only thing that held the car together in each Grand Prix. The same thing happened with Charles Leclerc, who in Singapore was forced to apply that technique for more than 60 consecutive laps. A mechanical and psychological punishment that translated into lost seconds, and a car incapable of defending its position aggressively. In retrospect, what Hamilton experienced was not just a warning. It was the first visible crack in a design that was silently failing. An invisible problem that has now become impossible to ignore, and that calls into question not only the reliability of the SF-25, but the very credibility of Ferrari in its goal of reconquering the top of Formula One. What came after the race in Singapore was no simple routine check. It was a complete technical autopsy. Ferrari, forced by the magnitude of the problem, dismantled every component of the SF-25's braking system and began an internal investigation with absolute priority. The instruction was clear. Understand why a car built to compete for titles was about to leave its star driver out of action due to a mechanical failure as basic as it was terrifying. What they discovered not only surprised, but set off all the alarms within Maranello. The failure was not the result of a defective part or incorrect installation. It was the direct result of fundamental design decisions made in the early phases of the car's development. Ferrari had pursued an idea: to compensate for the downforce deficiency that the SF-25 generated from the flat bottom, with an aggressive thermal management and frontal aerodynamic strategy. In other words, redirect the heat generated by the front brakes towards the tires to quickly reach the ideal thermal window. On paper, this made sense. In short qualifying sessions, when it is necessary to warm up the tires in 1 or 2 laps, this system provided a decisive advantage. But in practice, and especially in the race, the reality was brutal. The brake ducts, designed extremely tightly, retained excess heat. And that heat accumulated, lap after lap, until it exceeded all the safety margins tolerated by the internal components of the braking system. The integration of the MGU-K, the kinetic energy recovery system, also suffered in this poorly designed thermal ecosystem. When operating in areas of constant heat, its efficiency dropped drastically and it was sometimes forced to be disconnected preventively to avoid catastrophic failure. This was the real reason why Hamilton experienced intermittent power losses at several Grands Prix, even when no externally visible technical faults were reported. From that moment on, Ferrari found itself at a dead end. Raising the car to comply with the regulations meant losing downforce. Lowering the car again put the legality of the car at risk. The temporary solution? Bet even more on thermal management to compensate for the loss of mechanical grip. And that decision, precisely, is what created the perfect storm. With each lap, the SF25 became a thermal pressure cooker. A car forced to heat tires by extreme means, forced to ride at the limits of its structure, and with a design philosophy that punished more than rewarded in real racing conditions. Ferrari found itself caught in its own technical trap. Each decision made to solve one problem created another, more complex one. But the most serious thing was realizing that there was no immediate turning back. The changes required to resolve this structural failure involved modifying areas frozen by regulation, which limited the team's options to provisional solutions. Readjustments in air flows, microventilations within the ducts, and internal redesigns that were difficult to implement in the middle of an ongoing season. The autopsy of the SF25 not only revealed a technical failure, he exposed a philosophical dilemma at Ferrari. The team had built a car that worked well in theory, that shined in simulations, but was unable to hold up in the real conditions of a full race under pressure. A brilliant car in qualifying, but vulnerable in what really matters, the race. The big reveal not only changed the internal understanding of the car, but forced Ferrari to rewrite its planning ahead of the next big goal, the Brazilian Grand Prix. Interlagos is not just any circuit. It is a route with unique characteristics, with linked curves, constant changes in elevation and abrasive asphalt that punishes both brakes and tires. If there is a place where an unstable or thermally limited car can collapse, it is this. The Ferrari technical team knows it, and so does Lewis Hamilton. What happened in Singapore was a warning. Brazil could be the point of no return. For this reason, all resources have been mobilized from Maranello to redesign, in record time, key elements of the SF25. The focus is no longer on gaining pure speed. It is intended to ensure that the car survives the race without self-destructing inside. The first major measure has been the reconfiguration of the brake ducts. Ferrari has introduced a new specification with slightly wider ventilation channels, capable of evacuating heat more efficiently. But this redesign brings with it a problem. By losing heat retained in the rim area, the ability to quickly heat the tires is also lost, which can directly affect competitiveness in qualifying. A forced sacrifice, but one that weakens the strong point of the SF25. In addition, the height of the car with respect to the ground has been raised, an action that, although it helps preserve the legality of the plank and avoids penalties, affects the center of gravity and reduces the car's ability to generate ground effect. On a circuit like Interlagos, where medium-speed corners like Ferradura or Pinheirinho demand maximum aerodynamic grip, this could translate into loss of traction and balance. But the problem goes beyond technique. The real dilemma for Ferrari is in race management. How to race in Brazil with a car that can no longer exploit its advantage in qualifying and that must keep its brakes from the first lap. The only viable strategy is based on containment. Avoid unnecessary fights. Minimize aggressive braking. Manage temperatures as if each curve were a direct threat. In short, survive before attacking. This puts Hamilton in an unusual position. The 7-time world champion, known for his ability to squeeze every last centimeter of the track, will have to ride conservatively. His driving, his instincts, and his competitive nature will be faced with an uncomfortable reality, that his greatest talent must be repressed to protect the integrity of the car. In other words, a champion bound by technical limitations. And Brazil is just the beginning. Then will come Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi, circuits where the thermal demands and calendar pressure will put each of the implemented solutions to the test. If Ferrari fails to stabilize the situation at Interlagos, it will be difficult to regain control in the final rounds of the championship. The SF25 has proven to be a paradox. A brilliant car in theory, lethal in classification, but weak in essentials. And while the spotlight is on the podium in Brazil, in the Ferrari pits they are working against the clock, not for victory but to avoid collapse. And now, with all the elements on the table, what Ferrari found in Hamilton's car is no longer a simple technical incident. It is a warning with profound implications. The SF25 has gone from being the symbol of a new era for the Italian team to becoming a machine that represents the most dangerous thing in modern motorsport. A promise of performance trapped in a structure that cannot sustain it. What happened in Singapore has left a scar on the season. But what happens in Brazil can define whether this wound heals in time. or becomes infected until it consumes the team's aspirations. Ferrari has had to choose between performance and survival, between short-term speed and consistency that defines championships. And in that choice, perhaps also lies your destiny for the rest of the year. Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.